Hello everyone, and welcome to another response video. This one is addressed to a YouTube channel called SomeMoreNews, and his video called How Conservatives and the NRA Avoid Talking About Gun Control and More. Real quick before I start, I just want to say sorry about the long record time. There were a lot of things that needed to be addressed, and the last thing I want is to be told I wasn't thorough enough. I played as much of his video as I could and responded to as much as I could, but there's only so much I can do. So let's get to it.
It's been a bit over a month and a half since the Parkland mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and we know it's important to wait a bit to get into the whole gun discussion, so as not to politicize the most recent event in which someone who shouldn't have had a gun and used it to kill many people with it.
Right off the bat, you can already tell this is going to be an emotionally driven argument rather than a logical one. There is nothing wrong about wanting to wait a suitable amount of time after an evil event like a shooting before demanding political action. Emotions, especially grief, can result in impatient, short-sighted policies that don't fix any of the proposed issues. Or worse, people who desperately want the change can treat you terribly for not agreeing with them. But that comes later in the video.
So we calculated the appropriate amount of time to wait between shootings, ignored some of the other shootings, and we're now ready to maybe bring up the idea of maybe politicizing a little bit the most recent event in which someone who shouldn't have had a gun and used it to shoot many people with it.
As long as you make logical appeals rather than emotional ones, I honestly don't care how long you wait. Just don't treat your opponents like they're cold and unfeeling when they ask you for some time so they can separate their emotions from their policies. Who are you to say they're using this as a means to avoid conversation?
And details are still coming out about the shooter, although we're not going to share their face or name. A practice adopted by the Daily Wire and the Daily Wire's editor-in-chief, Ben Shapiro. This is a good practice. As Shapiro points out, studies show that a desire for fame is growingly common in mass shooters due to media contagion. The study suggests a media pact to no longer share, reproduce, or retweet the names, faces, detailed histories, or long-winded statements of killers, so that we could see a dramatic reduction in mass shootings in 1 to 2 years. So we're going to do that too. Because whenever something like this happens, there's an active attempt to not actually talk about it. There's a series of empty arguments to avoid actually talking about gun control.
Are they empty arguments? Or do you just not accept the counterpoints as a serious rebuttal and then laugh off the response rather than address it?
Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Even though studies show the presence of a gun makes it more likely that a person will kill himself or another person because guns were literally invented for the purpose of killing people.
If you think that sounded like an absolutely incorrect statement, you would be correct. I looked into the studies he posted here, and I have 2 things to say. 1. He did not do any work to find these. When I searched for the first article in his list, all the papers he had appeared in the same order he presented them, but he made it look like he actually spent more than 5 minutes looking for research. 2. I read the articles, and they do not in any way represent what he just said, and I'll go over the first 2. Barring the fact that all 4 of these articles were written in part by the same person, proving how valuable reliable data is, the first article was written by Hepburn and Hemenway, and it aims to prove that households with guns in them are at higher risk for homicide. In the second section of the paper, they look at case control studies. In section 2.1, they look at 3 counties in 3 states to evaluate the risk benefits of owning a gun. But they only looked at homes that already had a homicide with a gun. Here's the problem with that. If you want to prove to me that guns lead to homicide, you need to show me houses with guns that do have homicide and houses with guns that don't. But if that being left out wasn't enough to convince you, here are some other things that the study didn't take into account between case studies: psychological history, substance abuse, criminal history, and previous household violence, page 7. So this article is leaving something out that both Cody and I can agree on. People with tendencies towards violence, drug use, and partner abuse shouldn't have guns. No one is arguing that. But wait, there's more. The second section ends with this. None of these case control studies provided evidence whether the gun in the home was actually used in the homicide. So why on earth are you claiming it raises the chances of homicide? Moving on to the second article, which is written by Hemenway and Miller, aims to prove a similar notion but on a larger scale. It starts off by saying that the United States has the highest rate of civilian gun ownership and the highest homicide rate. And to prove this, they look at various high-income countries over various years. Why high-income countries, you might ask? Because if they include the world homicide rate, rather than being first, the United States would be 46th in homicides. Also, why does this look at homicide rate rather than gun homicide rate? That's because handguns are disproportionately being used in murder more than any other gun, but that doesn't fit their all guns are bad hypothesis, so they play the definition game and hope that you don't notice. And by the way, when Cody says that a gun makes you more likely to kill yourself, if he's pulling that from this article, he's misrepresenting it. This article mentions a 60% suicide rate with guns, but they don't talk about it at all in their findings. At the end, they postulate that if their assumption that higher gun availability equals more homicide is true, then surely it also raises the rate of suicide. And that's so wrong that it hurts. But I've spent too much time on this already, so let's move on.
Another conversation stopper is, but I'm a reasonable gun owner, as if that in any way assures anyone else is also a responsible gun owner.
People say this because gun laws would affect their lives more than the lives of criminals. They say this because you look at them and tell them that the mere presence of a gun makes them more likely to kill themselves and other people. That's why they say that.
Or maybe they mentioned the strict gun laws of Chicago without thinking about the extremely lax gun laws in the state just down the road.
The implication here is that all of Chicago's gun laws would work and stop gun crime if only more areas around them were equally as strict. But the data doesn't bear that out. Gun murders are all over the place in areas with and without strict gun laws. California and Texas are the states that have the most murder.
Or maybe they'll say, it's our right as Americans to individually own guns for hunting and target practice. You know how the Second Amendment's not about the people's ability to defend themselves against tyranny, but rather to kill animals for fun?
I fully agree with Cody on this point. I do not support killing animals for fun, but if you hunt state-approved animal species and use that meat for food to feed yourself, your family, or someone else, I find that morally acceptable.
Or, barring that, it's a right to have, a little hobby. I like to do target practice, and it's my right to shoot at a thing that can't die with a hunk of delicately designed and intricately crafted interlocking metal pieces that cause a small explosion in my hand that propels a smaller piece of metal forward at incredible speeds for the purposes and efficient effect of killing what I point it at. For my little hobby. It's my right. Get out of here.
This goes back to what I said earlier. Cody doesn't actually have a point against this. He just laughs it off and acts like it's not a good point to say I need to practice. Let me phrase it this way. I go to the range every month and practice my draw to make sure I'm efficient with my handgun. I do this to minimize the chance of missing my target and hurting someone innocent should the time come where I do need to draw. And again, I ask, who are you to tell me that that isn't my right?
Oh, another fun one is saying, well, cars kill people. Do you want to ban cars now? As if cars aren't heavily regulated and require a license to drive.
Cody, why don't you walk into a gun store and buy a gun without a license? We have regulations against buying guns already, and some states have crazy limitations on things like magazine capacity. Every single regulation made has yet to have the outcome you want, and yet you act like they do work. Oh, I forgot. It's Indiana's fault.
And also weren't invented for the sole purpose of killing people.
Yes, guns were made specifically to kill whatever it is you are pointing it at. That is why if I find someone in my house at night, I pull out my gun and not my toothbrush. Guns are not autonomous. Just because they are made to kill doesn't mean a gun in its entire lifespan will ever draw blood. Guns do not spontaneously make me nor anyone else want to hurt someone. If someone wants to hurt you, they'll find a way to get a gun. And that's the problem we both want to solve, but in different ways. The only difference is that I don't treat people like idiots when I disagree with them.
Regulated. If only the Founding Fathers thought to include that word somewhere in the Bill of Rights. Oh well, the list goes on.
The definition of regulated didn't mean legally restrictive at the time of founding. Why would the law be, let the government control the best way of preventing them from becoming tyrannical? Do you think the government has your best interest at heart? And I'm asking genuinely. Regulated essentially meant to be kept in efficient working order, like a clock being needed to be re-regulated. It doesn't mean legally bound.
But they, and points like it, are all designed to not have the conversation or take any action about the unavoidable specter of gun violence in America.
Are their points designed to not have the conversation, or are they perfectly reasonable refutations of what you believe? Considering that you treat people like me like an idiot and pretend like what I say has no ground, I'm not surprised people don't want to continue talking to you. You keep shouting false statements and then get mad when we prove you wrong. We don't prevent conversation, but that's how we finish it, and you can't come back, so you make a video like this one. And that's my problem with this fight. Cody doesn't want to find what's true. He just wants to try and look smart.
At this point, the right is so desperate to not talk about gun control, their main counter-argument has devolved into claiming that just saying do something or we want gun control isn't a policy.
That's because it's not. The #1 killer of Americans today is heart disease. Do something. You see how that doesn't solve anything?
You have to actually suggest something, as if nobody has ever suggested anything.
Alright, I like a challenge. If anything listed here can stop an active shooter, I will agree it can reduce mass shootings. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. And this didn't work for weed, by the way. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Are you serious? Wouldn't stop a shooting. Already in place. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. This has led to gun confiscation in the past, so no. Wouldn't stop a shooting. This has also been done in the past, and it didn't work very great for them. I'm talking about Russia. I think you get the idea. Nothing on this list would stop a school shooting.
And one of the only things you've suggested to help is to not retweet pictures of shooters' names and faces, which is a good idea. And yet, for this last shooting, you retweeted her face and name a couple of times throughout the day, man. Not to be the you had one job guy, but job-wise, there was only one. And you had it, Ben. You gave it to yourself.
100% agree. Good catch.
Yes, there are a lot of ways to reduce gun violence that don't involve changing which weapons are allowed to be sold and to whom. But that and those don't preclude us from talking about what to do about guns specifically. Studies show that fewer guns means fewer gun deaths, and studies show that more guns doesn't equal fewer gun deaths. So maybe it's time to talk about it?
More guns doesn't equal fewer gun deaths. Alright, let's see if this article says what he says it says, I say. First thing I see of note, there are no gun-free communities. I don't know why he doesn't include gun-free zones, but moving on. So here's a quick counterpoint. What do you see getting used as a target for mass murderers? Gun-free schools or gun ranges? It's the gun-free zones. But let's keep reading. With this first graph, you see this reference author, Arthur Kellerman. Does that name look familiar? That's the same article referenced in the first source Cody used to say that guns lead to higher chances of homicide. Here's an interesting statistics lesson. If you use the same incorrect premises, you're going to get the same incorrect results. This part of the study is now completely derailed because I know the guns they are talking about were not proven to be used in the subsequent homicides. If you want to explain to me more guns means more violence, please explain why these states with the most guns are not found among the top states with most gun murders.
Tactic to avoid the gun control talk usually works. Eventually, the cycle continues. But not this time, because over the past since the Parkland shooting, many of the students have become regulation advocates, confronting politicians and Second Amendment defenders/misunderstanders, and leading protests. And boy, do people hate these fucking kids. The Parkland teens are the talk of the very mad town. Despite the teens advocating for a wide range of proposals to keep them from not getting shot at,
Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop a shooting. Wouldn't stop.
a lot of people seem to think that they're trying to take away everyone's Second Amendment rights, which they've never said they want to do. These punks, these bullies.
Sign our petition. It takes 2 seconds, and it matters. We will take the big, and we will take the small, but we will keep fighting. When they give us that inch, that bump stock ban, we will take a mile. We are not here for breadcrumbs, we are here for real change. We are here to lead.
I think David Hogg is a bully.
No, wait. It's not bullying to criticize people in power. It's not bullying to be mean to people in power. Bullying is about people in power, with real power, intimidating those weaker than them. What's bullying? Some kids are mean to politicians? Or a media personality on the most watched and only president-approved news channel makes fun of a kid for not getting into college? You think it's bullying to publicly and aggressively pressure politicians? Are you a politician? It's not bullying, it's holding people in power accountable because they don't do it themselves.
Here is what Cody is saying from my perspective. The anti-gun Parkland crew calling Marco Rubio the same person as the Parkland shooter in a room where they have all the power over Rubio in order to either force him into submission and follow their agenda or make him look as bad as possible. Not bullying. Laura Ingram saying David Hogg whines about not getting into college when she had absolutely nothing to do with the selection process because her tweet was made after his rejection. Now it's bullying. Just making sure we have our lines straight, Cody. And you know how I know I'm right and you're wrong? When you say holding people accountable, you mean the politicians, the people who had nothing to do with this. You don't talk about the security guard who ran away, or the police team that didn't go in. Why not, I wonder?
And they're powerful. You can't bully them. So maybe these kids aren't bullies. Maybe you just hate them because normally gun control debates, pardon the language, die off after a few days. But because of these teens, we're forced to keep having it, and you don't want to.
If Stephan Crowder didn't want to talk about gun control, why would he have 2 campus sessions where he specifically talks with college students about gun control?
Ah, hell yeah. When I think gun control that many countries have, I think Nazis.
Given that you've suggested gun control measures we've tried in the past that led to massive genocide, I'm not surprised you didn't know that Hitler took the guns. Source below.
The likely socialism.
The likely socialism? First of all, the kid's only ever talked about gun control, which isn't socialist. Are you assuming he's a likely socialist because kids these days want universal health care? Do you think universal health care is a sign of Nazism? Like, I know Hitler used socialist talking points and programs in order to gain power and then do all that Nazi stuff, but you don't really think Nazis were socialists, do you? Oh, you do? You have articles and other... Okay. You know it's the Nazi stuff people are mad at the Nazis for, right? And like, should I just say historians disagree with you and move on? Hey, you know what country has socialized medicine and isn't run by Nazis? Current day Germany. I can't believe...
Wow, that might take gold in the Strawman Olympics. If you're going to take Crowder that far out of context, you can at least have the decency to link his video so your audience can confirm what you're saying is true.
Sorry. Crowder, go on. How else is David Hogg like a Nazi?
And the policies that you're proposing, which, by the way, strip other people of their fundamental human rights.
Now, wait a minute. Your fundamental human right of what? Individual ownership of a gun? And this is what I'm talking about. It's something you say to stop the conversation. People say this all the time to shut it down. They refer to their God-given right, which I guess brings us to a segment we like to call your God-given right to own a piece of delicately designed and intricately crafted interlocking metal pieces that cause a small explosion in your hand that propels a smaller piece of metal forward at incredible speeds for the purposes and efficient effect of killing what you pointed at.
If you play the full clip in context, you'd understand he was talking about the God-given right to defend yourself. And I'll ask a third time, who are you to say that we can't do that?
Because we have history books to know what Nazis are and think and did. Or at least, a lot of us do.
Find me the chapter where Hitler took over the neighboring countries that had armed citizens. Not just a military, but citizens as well. You might find that he didn't. He took over the weak first.
I don't want to talk about Stephan Crowder or Ben Shapiro so much, actually, either. I really don't. But they're loud voices in this conversation, and often dishonest. And
if my video wasn't already pushing 20 minutes, I would address that entire section, but I really need to finish this up.
Ben is uniquely positioned in the national gun debate, because while the gun control Parkland teens were accused of being crisis actors and manipulated by the media to push their agenda and told what to say, Ben has been coaching and helping pro-Second Amendment advocate Kyle Kashuv, who could not be here today because we don't have guests. So Ben is coaching him, which is fine. Being in the public spotlight and articulating your opinions is hard, and these kids deserve to be heard and helped. And I don't want to bully Ben. I think we'd actually probably get along. We both play music, we both talk at people for a living, we both have held a gun. But now, Ben is embedded in this national conversation, and many of his tactics are to not have the conversation. He wrote a book, or really more like a pamphlet, How to Destroy a Leftist. And aside from the fact that the main example of leftist he uses is Piers Morgan, okay, Ben. The majority of this book isn't about how to debate or present a convincing argument or be honest. It's about how to frame the debate and how to trip people up so they look foolish and then the conversation can stop. It's a book about how to stop conversations.
I haven't read it, so I'm just gonna have to take your word for it. But what I can say about Ben is that he is more than willing to have debates with people, and he will be as snarky to you as you are to him. So if you want to have a respectful debate, you can have one with Ben. Trust me.
What people like Ben and these other students are talking about is the Second Amendment and how gun control infringes on our Second Amendment rights. But rights are regulated, It's why there are libel laws and rules in advertising, and why you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. It's why the Parkland students now have to wear clear backpacks, which seems like a Fourth Amendment issue.
This is the most infuriating part of the entire video. The Second Amendment is regulated. But just because I don't need to have my fingerprints scanned, my entire history to kindergarten scrutinized, and my colon scoped for polyps doesn't mean there aren't rules. We have rules. And if you can prove that your rules will stop shootings and do a better job at preventing them, then I will happily stand by you. But it's that evidence part that trips you up every time. If I'm a felon, if I'm a domestic abuser, if I'm on drugs, if I've got a shady background, I can't buy a gun. You want to stop people from getting guns because of the motives you prescribe them. And Cody, you are very good at prescribing motive. Moreover, let's talk about the clear backpacks. You wanted better security, and you got it, and here it is. And this really makes me upset. You want laws that affect everyone else but you. But as soon as these laws make you do something even slightly uncomfortable, you throw a damn fit and expect the Bill of Rights to protect you. Looks like saying do something wasn't the right thing to do after all.
The idea of gun regulation isn't automatically infringing on your Second Amendment rights. Of every single amendment, the second one is the only one with regulated in the text. The original draft mentioned well-regulated militias in the middle, but they decided to make the sentence structure more awkward in order to mention well-regulated militias as soon as possible.
You don't know what regulated means.
The notion that individual gun ownership is a right isn't in the Constitution, and it's actually a relatively new idea as a legal concept. As of 1888, when law review articles started being indexed, every single one agreed that the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee the individual right to own a gun. This was the consensus for more than 2 centuries after the Constitution was written. Before then, the Federalist Papers, notes on the Constitutional Convention, they all debate the idea and logistics of militias. For example, how often militias, which are necessary for the security of a free state, should meet, and so on. But they don't mention individual rights to own a gun.
Cody is actually right here. They don't specifically mention the word gun, because the Founding Fathers knew that technology and terminology would change, like the word regulated, for example. They made it as clear as day that whatever the government has, it should not be able to overpower the people. Let's take Federalist Paper 46 as you cited as an example, Cody. Quote, "Let a regular army, fully equal to the resources of the country, be formed, and let it be entirely at the devotion of the federal government. Still, it would not be going too far to say that the state governments, with the people on their side, would be able to repel the danger. It does not say I have an individual right to own a gun, but it clearly states to keep the government at bay. And you know how we do that right now, Cody? With an armed citizenry. If America were to be invaded, the invaders would blow through the coasts, no problem. And then they hit the mainland, where there's a nice shiny 5.56 round waiting for them behind every blade of grass. Go ahead and pick an invader, foreign or domestic, because if that invasion happens, your gun-free zones won't help you."
But certain quotes can be taken out of context.
Yeah, I wonder what that would look like, Cody, to take something out of context.
As noted in the Pulitzer Prize-winning book Original Meanings by historian Jack Rakove. For example, Patrick Henry once said, "The great object is that every man be armed." Except the rest of the quote is, "At a very great cost, we shall be doubly armed," because he was talking about fiscal responsibility and complaining about both the federal and state government paying to arm the militias.
Cody might actually have a point here, except for the fact that he did the exact thing he accused Dana of, which forced me to look up the actual quote to prove that Dana was using the quote correctly. Here's what Patrick Henry said: "If you have given up your militia, and Congress shall refuse to arm them, you have lost everything. Your existence will be precarious because you depend on others whose interests are not affected by your infelicity. I therefore contend that, if Congress do not arm the militia, we ought to provide it for ourselves." But Cody, go ahead and tell me that your regulations are a good thing, and that the Federalist Papers are on your side, because I can assure you, they're not.
The idea of individual gun ownership especially took hold in the 1970s, when the NRA, which originally only promoted gun safety and training and regulation, was taken over basically in the dark of night and started focusing the group on lobbying Congress and promoting gun sales and pushing for individual gun rights. They post videos about how people are taking away your guns so gun sales go up.
Or maybe, after a shooting, people are scared. Maybe when you push for gun regulations while treating me like an idiot, people don't respond positively to that. And then when the NRA comes along and says, "Hey, Here's a gun. If you buy this, you might have a better chance at stopping a threat that faces you. People might resonate with that a little bit more. Do you see what I'm saying? And by the way, the NRA offers training courses, safety classes, and any help they can on getting you trained. But not everyone can afford that. Some people like me work 6 days a week and spend the 7th day with their family and don't have time, money, or energy to take every single safety class that you think I should. Oh, right. Sorry for shutting down the conversation with my opinion.
This decades-long campaign to change what the Second Amendment means, after centuries of it meaning something else, culminated in Columbia versus Heller, a case from less than 10 years ago brought forth by libertarian lawyers in the only Second Amendment case in American history that promoted individual gun rights. Antonin Scalia, retire bitch Scalia, wrote that guns are legal for individuals in common use to protect hearth and home, which is a weird fucking way to say for the people in a well-regulated militia. You fucking stupid judge.
There's nothing for me to comment on here. He didn't refute what the court decided.
During the press conference after the ruling, one could apparently see posters behind Heller reading, "Let every man be armed." You know, that out-of-context quote about fiscal responsibility of well-regulated militias.
Don't worry, Cody. We won't forget what it looks like when someone takes something out of context.
If the NRA really believed in defending the Second Amendment right of individual gun ownership, which isn't in the Second Amendment, maybe they should vocally defend people like Philando Castile, who legally owned a gun, informed an officer that he had one, reached for his license and registration.
Say that part again, but slowly.
Who legally owned a gun,
informed an officer that he had one, reached for his license and registration.
Cody, I'm going to assume you don't have a concealed handgun license, so listen carefully as this might save your life. Because despite what you think, I don't want you to die. I want you to be alive so we can have an actual discussion one day and not a spit fight. If you have a gun in your car and you inform a police officer, you don't move. Period. I don't care what race you are. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what you smell like. Your hands glue to the wheel and you do what the officer says. That is among one of the very first things your CHL officer will teach you when you take the class.
And then shot dead by the police. Instead, after many weeks, the NRA said that Philando's death was a tragedy, didn't mention the Second Amendment, and then later Dana Lash tweeted, well, Philando had weed on him, so...
And remind me again why the NRA needs to comment on every shooting. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Castile should be dead. But from the cop's perspective, the cop had to make a judgment call. And who are you to say he was wrong?
See ya.
Sorry for the long video, guys. There were a lot of things wrong here, and it was hard to narrow it down, and I wanted to make sure I was thorough. Let me know if I missed something, was wrong on a point, or missed the mark entirely. As always, I strongly encourage anyone seeing this to please watch the original video for yourself and see whom you agree with. I know I got emotionally involved in this one. Guns are a hot topic for me, and I can't stand it when people look down on you for what you believe. As always, I want to stress that I don't care about winning a debate. I want to know what's true. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed.